of Community Engagement at Medium. And today I want to talk a little bit about Medium and give you guys some of the insights into what makes us tick and some examples into how people have used content and really reached their audiences that they want to and really made a difference on the platform. So to get started, a little bit about Medium. Ev Williams is our CEO, and he founded Medium in 2012. He, before that, founded Blogger and Twitter. And what he really wanted here was to create an open exchange of ideas that could move conversation forward, no matter who you were. Even if you didn't have a following beforehand, they wanted you to be able to publish your content and find people who wanted to read what you had to say without having to do a lot of work so that you could just focus on what you were saying and the story you were trying to tell. Medium is the first social publishing platform, so yes, we are a blogging site, but what we really care about and what really makes us different is our network and distribution. You'll hear me talk a lot about this today, but really for us, it's about storytelling tools and discovery so that audiences can go and find the information that they want and discover things that they might not even have known they wanted to follow. And authors can write their story and find and grow their audience and really get a community and a constant following as they write consistently. This is some of the publishers that have come on our platform in the last year. We've really grown significantly in the last 2 years. And these are some of the big names that have either started on our platform or have migrated over. So in the case of Think Progress, they migrated on to Medium, and The Ringer, which is helmed by Bill Simmons, started up from scratch on Medium and is actually one of our huge traffic drivers right now. So for us, ideas matter, and this can sound very, high thinking, but it is the core of what we do and really what matters the most and what made Ev want to start this company. We're a free and open platform. That means anyone can write, anyone can start writing, and that's super important to us and something that we think about every day in the choices we make. We also have a very clean editor, but we really care very deeply about it not getting in the way of what you need to do. So our product updates and our features, we don't want them to do anything but help you in telling your story, and we don't want you to have to think about those tools. We want you to think about what you're writing or doing or making on the page. And again, we have that powerful network for you to share your work, which I will get more into the details of exactly what that means in terms of the distribution and how you actually get started on that and how it actually helps fuel people. This is my line that this is not a spectator sport, and this is really going back into the old world of the way content was often published. People would write a story, put it on the internet, and you might have heard, don't read the comments, or, well, I wrote it and people can consume it and that's the end of it. The success of Medium is not about that one-way street of I've published it and now people will consume it, maybe they'll drop in a comment and they'll go. It's really a dynamic conversation. So stories on Medium, they can travel for weeks or months or even years past their publication date, and conversations that happen there with the author or through the communities that are reading and consuming and talking about that content can happen long after publication. There's a long tail there that's actually surprising compared to more traditional publishing platforms. So how we do that is through responses and highlights. There are several other methods that we have. Recommendations are another tool. But in terms of creating conversation and building a community, responses and highlights are two of the most powerful things that you can do in order to give your content legs over time and through a wide audience. So responses are our response to comments. They are what someone can do after they're done reading a story to respond directly to the author or to someone else who's talking to the author on the page. But the important thing about responses that makes them different from comments as we know them is that at Medium, they are treated with the same weight as an original story. So if you write a response, it will travel through the network exactly as an original story will. And that means, I kind of always give the example of a cocktail party, that the first person who starts talking isn't the most important person to say something. The person who responds after and the side conversations that spin out of those kinds of conversations that start, they're just as important and perhaps more important than the first person who spoke. And that's kind of how I think of responses in terms of how they travel and how they generate content and conversation long after that first story has been published. We also don't want people to be forced to respond in order to interact on Medium. So highlights are one of the things that we pioneered and are just as powerful for both readers and writers. When you see a phrase, a word, a sentence, a paragraph that you find moving, interesting, you want to respond to, you think is controversial, you disagree with, you can highlight it. And that not only signals to your network who follow you that you read something and you cared about it, but it also shows other people who are following you and reading that story what moved you the most in that post. And it signals to the writer who can see every single thing that someone highlighted, what people cared about and what moved them. So it helps writers understand how to get better at their craft and what's really resonating with their audience. So these tools are really important, not just to readers, but also to the authors. I love this stat because this shows that we care a lot more about clicks and page views. Readers have spent over 3.5 millennia on Medium, and I'm sure that this stat has grown because we add a lot of reading time every day. To us, that's the most important thing that we care about. We don't measure success as a company in terms of clicks and page views. We use a metric called TTR, which stands for total time read. And that's, for us, the metric of whether what we're doing is working. Because we want people to actually be engaging with that content and paying attention to it and spending the time to fully read it and understand it and interact with it and the people who are reading it in the community as well as the author. So this stat being as large as it is means that we're doing something right, and it's the most important metric for us. This is a slide from my brand partnership team. But I think it's really important for people who are starting out on Medium. I think a lot of you guys have probably started a blog or a website from scratch, and you know how hard that is. Starting from zero is really scary. You can buy traffic, you can buy people to follow, but trying to go from zero upwards organically is really difficult. And that's one of the value propositions of Medium, and they call it the Medium effect because it's a catchy little phrase. And over the past year, it's grown significantly. And publications on our site can see up to a 38% lift in traffic because they are on our network, because their work is always going through the channels and it's always being able to be surfaced on people's streams, even if they're not following the publication, so that they're always naturally and organically growing, which is something that's so much harder to do when you're building your own site. And so being part of this network and this living, breathing ecosystem of other people who are writing all the time really does have a noticeable effect for your publication growth. This is my line that I like to say every time when I come to a conference like this. I am the head of community engagement, so I spend my days thinking about how to keep people around longer, make them happy, make them more loyal, get writers to write more, get readers to read more. And I take this quite literally, that community is the end and the beginning of your company, and without them, your product doesn't have a purpose. When you think about this in terms of Medium, it can be very literal. If we didn't have authors and readers, there would be nothing on our site. It would be just a shell of technology. It wouldn't matter. But this thought can go and be applied even to someone like Nike. Without people to put their feet in the shoes and run or walk or play sports, they'd have a lot of stores with shoes in them, but there would absolutely be no purpose to their product. And I think this is something to really take to heart when you're thinking about the content that you're creating, especially when you're thinking about creating it for a long-term conversation and for communities that you want to keep coming back and engaging with you and engaging with each other, is to really think about what matters to them and why there's a reason for them to keep coming back and enjoying what you're making with each other and with you. So I'm going to get into a couple tactics of how you can make the most out of Medium before I go into some examples of people who have been successful on the platform using these tactics. So to start off, I said that the Medium effect can help you go from zero to followers, but you don't have to start at zero on Medium, although that's a viable solution. When you start a profile or a publication on Medium, you can import your Twitter followers. And anyone who is following you already on Twitter and who is also on Medium will start following you, which makes sense. If they already want to engage with you and read your tweets, it makes sense that they'd want to read the content that you create here. When you're on the network, you can also leverage a diversity of voices. And by that I mean there are a lot of people writing on Medium about topics that pertain to your brand and to your own personal goals and your mission. So by doing that, you'll be able to bring in new voices to share new perspectives, and through them be able to reach their audiences and, again, expand your reach. The flip side of that is following accounts to become part of the Medium ecosystem. And I always stress this when brands and new writers come on the platform, even if you're a big name. To be successful on Medium, you always have to think of it as a two-way street. So if you care about a topic, you should be following that topic and reading other thought leaders there, highlighting their work, responding to it. That is just as important as publishing into the system directly. I will show some examples of publications here, but to be a little bit, broad here, there are two different ways that you can write on Medium. Everybody has an individual user profile, but you can also be part of a publication, which can draw in writers in a collective and group them in a publication that can also look really great, usually around a topic. So we have, as I showed you, The Ringer, Think Progress, Pacific Standard. Those are some of our really big publications. But we also have some really formidable community publications that have been started from people who just write on Medium, not because it's their job, not because they're getting paid to. The Mission is one of the ones that I really love to use as an example here. They talk about sports. They can be about humor, life hacks, pretty much anything that you can think of, there is a publication on Medium for it. Tags are the lifeblood of distribution for your stories. You get 5 for every story you write, and I always say that you would be foolish not to find a 5th tag to put on there. It is one of the primary ways people search and discover new content. So if you think about a story, it's usually multifaceted. There's never just one specific word or phrase that you would use to describe what you're talking about. And by using a diverse set of topics, tech, fashion, conferences, you'll be able to hit 3 distinct different groups who are following different issues or topics that will want to read your content, all that pertain to what you're saying, but they might not all overlap. And so by using tags intelligently, you can really increase your distribution, but find people who will care about what you're saying and then start following you regularly. And then finally, as I've said before, using responses, highlights, and recommendations to engage with your audience. All 3 of these methods help further your distribution. If someone presses the recommendation button, your story will publish into their stream so that other people who follow them can discover it. And the same goes with highlights and responses. So every time someone interacts with your content on Medium, they're helping further spread it to their network, because the thinking there goes, people who follow them care about what they're reading, so they are being the thought leaders there and the taste makers for them. And that's how things spread out intelligently, but in a more qualified way where people will be more interested in the content rather than it just being spammed out into the ecosystem without there being any sort of reason for why you're seeing something. So let's talk about some of those moments on Medium and ways that people have used Medium and these tactics to be successful. I'm going to start big here with a publication called Cancer Moonshot. Cancer Moonshot was a publication that was created by Vice President Joe Biden because he wants to cure cancer. He has a lot of very formidable names who are writing into this, doctors and experts, and he's got a lot of great stories being published in there. But one of the most recent ones that was published that gained a lot of traction was from Ben Stiller, who is very much not a scientist. And Ben Stiller announced on Medium that 2 years ago he had an early test that diagnosed him with prostate cancer, and it saved his life. And this was big news and a very personal story for him. And it was very well received on Medium and within the Cancer Moonshot publication. And this really leverages the diversity of voices that I was talking about, that Biden was able to reach an entirely new crowd who found out about Cancer Moonshot by working with Ben Stiller, and Ben Stiller was able to get his message out in a very serious and weighty way by partnering with Vice President Biden. You can also see here the power of highlights in terms of being able to work on your content strategy. you might think that his intro paragraph or maybe his retrospective last sentence would have been the top highlight that people would have grabbed. And you'd be surprised to see that it was actually a parenthetical in the middle of the story that was actually kind of a joke. But that's what most people highlighted and resonated with them. And that's important because as Vice President Biden and his team wants to reach more people, they're going to be able to use these as notes to understand what they should be writing and the voice they should be using to really resonate with new people and reach new audiences. Moving into another big name, but a very different name, Glenn Beck took to the platform to talk about a meeting he had with Facebook after there were issues around censorship and worries there. Some of you guys might remember when that happened. Now, Glenn Beck has a large following. He has his own website where he could publish. He clearly has a platform that he could speak on and didn't need Medium. But he decided to come to Medium because he wanted to use us to reach a new group of people and to talk about this with an active community who cared about what he was saying, but didn't follow him specifically. As you can see here from the top highlight, what he had to say was important and was really cared about on the network. And as you can see here from his other stats, he had thousands of recommendations and hundreds of responses. And by using tags saying Facebook, journalism, and Silicon Valley, he hit on 3 groups that are very popular and talked about widely on Medium. So he was grabbing an active user base of engaged people who are also thought leaders in this space, which was tapping into an entirely new perspective, which was huge for him because what he wanted to do was get his message out, much further than his already actively engaged audience. Another big name you probably know is Hillary Clinton. She has a publication on Medium, and the important thing here is while her publication is largely about trying to become president, she's able to use her publication to bring in a lot of different voices to publish so that she can share more perspectives than just whatever her campaign speeches or her policies are. Actually, in the case of this example that I'm giving right now, this story was not actually directly about her campaign at all. It was about women who had influenced her life. And so by being able to have the space and the time to share a different voice and a different perspective of herself, she's able to create an active following and share through the network, and be able to have her stories and her personality propagate without directly having to hit her marketing and her PR messages every time. This was one of her more popular stories, even though it wasn't directly for her cause. It was a more tangential lifestyle story. I want to give you some examples of people who aren't big names, too, because the lion's share of people who write on Medium are regular people. In this case, this is Nate. He calls himself in his bio a human being. He is a veteran, and he wrote an open letter to Colin Kaepernick, who is an NFL player who took a knee during the national anthem. And he wanted to write to Colin and explain what that meant to him and how he felt. It was a highly personal story, and while Nate probably didn't think Colin was going to read his open letter, there were a lot of people in the national stage who were talking about this event and had opinions about it, and he wanted to also reach that audience. So he originally posted this story on a website called the Army Times, but he decided to repost it on Medium because he wanted to be able to tap into that larger audience and be able to discuss this issue that he thought was really important. And while I don't know the exact traffic numbers of Army Times, I think his decision there was because he'd gotten traction on that site and he wanted to make it even larger and bring it to a larger crowd. And because of our network, he was able to reach a lot more people. Again, over 1,000 recommendations and hundreds of responses. And he did that primarily through tags. Here he's using NFL, sports, military, racism, and football. And this is what I'm saying when I say use full use of your tags, because his story was very multifaceted, and it did cover all of these topics. And there are people who are active on our network who care about all of those issues, and he wouldn't have been able to catch them all if he hadn't been able to use those tags, which help fuel his distribution and hit all of those very important areas who would care deeply about his story. I like this one too. This is a different story. You guys might remember last year the New York Times published an expose about what it was like to work at Amazon. Caused a bit of a stir. And Carney decided to post his rebuttal to the New York Times on Medium. Carney is the Senior Vice President of Global Corporate Affairs at Amazon, if I'm remembering his title correctly. So he has a couple places he can put his message out. Even if he hadn't chosen to do it on Amazon or the New York Times, he could have chosen a New York Times competitor. But he really wanted to use Medium because it's an open platform, and he'd be able to get his message out, and it was a very contentious message, but he wanted as many people to read it as possible. A lot of people did. It got 2,000 recommendations. As a side note here, you might notice it didn't have any responses. Doesn't really play into what I'm saying here in terms of network distribution, but we do take trust and safety very seriously. And so because of how volatile this conversation was, he did opt to turn off responses. People can still respond to them. They all just didn't populate below the story, which was an interesting choice, in my opinion. If I were his advisor, maybe I'd tell him to just put it all out there. But the cool thing about this story was it caused such a stir in the community and in the press in general. The New York Times actually logged on, made an account on Medium, and posted their response to his rebuttal. And you know, the New York Times, I think they have a place to publish stuff if they want to. So I kind of liked that they did that, and I enjoyed seeing the back and forth. This was before I actually worked at Medium, so it was definitely a popcorn day for me. So to follow up, I want to talk about two more normal people who not only have gotten their message out through Medium and through these tactics, but have also made a bit of a difference in what they've done. So Rohan is a man that one of my colleagues first heard his story in a Facebook group. He is a black man, and he wanted to rent a vacation home on Airbnb, and he was discriminated against because he was black. They turned him down for that rental, and when a friend asked for the exact same dates, who was white, got that rental. So my colleague said, you should write your story and share it on Medium. And he did, complete with pictures. It was a very personal and heartfelt narrative and well-written. And a lot of people read it, and the conversation really resonated with the community. This post got over 4,000 recommends and almost 1,000 responses. And when I say it made a difference, in part because of the story and what happened afterwards, he helped institute change, and Airbnb helped tighten up their discrimination policies, which is a big deal. And he actually ended up launching his own platform after that too, which was pretty cool for him. My final example is a name that some of you guys might know. Talia Jane was a customer service representative working at Yelp, and she posted an open letter to her CEO. Earlier this year. And if you talk to Talia Jane, she would say that she never thought that much would come out of this post, which we did talk to her. She actually said she thought a couple of her friends would recommend it, maybe her mom would share it on Facebook, but it wouldn't go very far. What Talia was talking about was how difficult it was to have a living wage in Silicon Valley. And she really exposed a lot of problems that we have in America that are really big issues. Tech companies, living wage, what it's like to be a customer service individual. There were a lot of conversations even about millennials that sparked from this on Medium, and more importantly, off of Medium. Her story spread very far on our network and very widely out of our network. This story was recommended over 3,000 times and had an astronomical 1,300 responses. Talia did make a difference. She was let go from her job, in part because of this, but the end result of all of this was also that Yelp did change some of their policies, which was a big deal and did matter to her, and I think this changed her life in a direction that she probably didn't intend at first, and it's kind of a two-sided parable of the power of the network, because her story was so relatable and important to what people on our network cared about, and also what the larger issues in the community were about, that it really went far in a way that she didn't believe it could and probably wouldn't have if it hadn't been posted here. So you've heard me talk a lot about the power of recommendations and, in particular, responses. And when I say responses, I'm giving you a couple hundred or maybe a couple thousand. And you guys are probably saying, well, I've gotten 1,000 comments on something. What's a big deal about that? That doesn't sound like a hugely impressive number. I want to show you a visualization of what a response tree can look like. So these are 4 different response trees from different stories on the network. That first circle that you see, the larger it is, the more total time has been read on it. And every line and dot after that is a response, and then another conversation tree branching out. So that first one you see is probably a normal conversation. It got a couple recommends, maybe 10, 12, 15. You can see it had a couple responses, sprouted 3 different conversation trees. It was fine. And then as you go down that list, you can see them getting denser and denser, and the breadth and the depth of conversations are getting larger and larger. And then when you see what looks like a solid black line, that's Talia Jane's conversation tree. So there were 1,300 first conversations, but everything that came beyond that was so densely packed that I actually didn't have a monitor that could zoom in enough to be able to show you the lines. And that's just what happened on Medium, not what happened elsewhere that you guys probably also saw. A Medium reader spends an average of 2 minutes and 21 seconds on each post. In a world where we're talking about having 15 seconds on a page being impressive, and we're thinking about bounce rates, capturing someone for 2 minutes and 21 seconds on average is pretty huge. And again, for us, TTR is the all-important metric, so we're pretty proud of this. Because to us, success is someone taking enough time to read it and understand it and care about it and respond to it. We want to create an environment where people can talk to each other and actually are listening. We don't want to just create a one-way consumption situation. We want people thinking. When we say we want to move conversation forward, we mean that deeply, and every product decision we make is built to help facilitate people having to spend more time on the page and actually getting something out of it. So a lot of you guys work for companies, so I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about brands. There we go. And what brands are saying on Medium. I have talked about some notable faces who could be thought of brands in the case of Hillary Clinton, but there are brands on the platform who are very successful and having these same conversations and being able to interact with people as the individuals I used as examples. So here's what they are talking about on average. When you think about a brand, you probably think about a press release or a marketing beat or a new feature. And those posts are out there. And they usually have a more personal narrative so they can be more engaging. But brands are also writing about a lot of things that we as people care about. Corporate responsibility, health and lifestyle, even their own personal narratives. The important takeaway here is that to really connect and to build a lasting portfolio and a lasting publication on the network is being able to write about things that regular people are writing about. Because even if you're a brand, you're still a brand comprised of humans, and that's what matters here. So I want to go into 3 examples of brands that have had successful campaigns on Medium to wrap up the talk. Brands that you probably wouldn't think are likely candidates for a Medium publication. My first is REI. They wanted to make a campaign to get people to go outside rather than shop on Black Friday last year. And what they wanted to do is build a publication where they could move beyond their corporate spokespeople and their high-level executives who usually talk, and bring in nonprofits and influencers and activists who care about their brand and use their brand to tell stories of adventuring and going outside and exploring and being active. At the end of the day, yes, REI probably wanted people to go and buy stuff in their store, but they didn't want to go at it that head on. They really wanted to have a shared experience with the community of the joy of being outside and the joy of using the products that they sell to live your life and to have fun outdoors. It was a successful campaign because they decided to share those stories and really expose the voices of people that mattered to the people in the Medium community. Second example is Starbucks. Starbucks had the challenge of wanting to highlight their philanthropic brand, Upstanders. When you think of Starbucks, you probably think coffee. You don't think philanthropic brand. And that was their challenge. And so their solution was to create a publication and to partner it with some of our promoted stories, which is a product, to help distribute their content about what Upstanders was doing to a new audience. They knew that people on Medium cared about the work that they were doing and cared about the stories that they had to tell and the successes they had. And by using their new publication, Promoted Stories, and our network, they saw 27x increase in the time spent with their content over the baseline activity that they had, which was huge for them. Because they not only were able to reach an entirely new audience, but they got to expose people to an entirely different side of the brand that was really important to them when most people think really expensive lattes. My final example is Slack, which is a wildly successful publication on Medium. They wanted to capitalize on the buzz and popularity around their product and to be able to have a deeper interaction with their customers. So they went all in and migrated their WordPress blog onto Medium, and they made their Medium blog the anchor of their content strategy. And the purpose here was to be able to not only publish from everyone at their company, but also to be able to have really deeper engagements with their customers. And since doing that, they've seen an overall increase in traffic to their posts as well as engagement. And they've also seen a more regular viral spread of their work as their popularity has grown. And I find this very timely because many of you guys may have read a viral post of theirs on Medium this week, which was their response to a Microsoft announcement. But that is a great notable example of what happened just this week with the brand of being on Medium. But when you go into any of their posts, you can go down to their responses and see their customer service team or their regular company employees responding and talking to people, even sometimes just about product features or issues that don't even pertain to the article. They really go all into having that deep interaction. So that's the end of the spiel. So thank you so much. I want to take the rest of the time to hopefully answer a couple questions, any follow-ups.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I have two questions for you, and I think people in the audience will probably relate to one of these or maybe both. But so my question is, if you're like a small e-commerce site or you're a small business and you don't post a ton of blog posts, like, is there any instance where you would admit that maybe it is a better idea to just have a native blog? Like, if you're writing one blog post a week, does it make sense to write those on Medium for your small group of people, or does it make more sense for them to just read your blog post on the same page they're shopping? You know what I mean? Like, is there ever, obviously you work for Medium, but is there ever a case where it doesn't, you would maybe not advise somebody to do that, or? Because I think that's a decision people make with a small company. It's like, do we need to be on Medium if we're small?
So I like to start off answering this kind of question with the story of how I started working at Medium. I previously worked at Tumblr and started writing on Medium just in my spare time when I worked at Tumblr. I actually had my own blog that my husband, who's an engineer, had coded me a CMS for, and it was a pain in the ass when any bugs would come up, and I didn't want to get divorced. And also, no one ever went to it because I'd publish like once a month, twice a month maybe. So I went on Medium, and actually from my writing there and from growing my audience, I ended up talking to them. One thing led to another. Here I am today. So the real question there is, do you want to spend the time on the tech? Do you want to spend time hiring someone to worry about the back end, or do you really want to worry about the content and telling the story and getting it to the right people? And that's the value proposition, especially if you're a smaller business where your resources are limited, where you're not going to have to worry about advertising or growing something quite as much. You're going to worry about the compelling story and how to use our network, and you're not going to have to worry about any of that tech because we have a good editor. And so I would say, especially if you're not writing that frequently, it's almost always better to try and be part of the Medium network, because you have to write a lot in order to have traction on your own internal site, where it becomes a habit for someone to keep coming back, where you can get that velocity to really grow. And we give that to you even if you're not writing that frequently, which is huge.
Awesome, thank you. And then the other question is for larger media companies like The Ringer, for instance, that is built on Medium. How much customization is offered for those companies? Like, obviously the appeal, like you're saying, is huge, but if you are on the fence and you don't want to sacrifice customization, like how customized can they make it?
So we've built out a lot of new customization tools for publications, which is the way, if somebody wants something to look and feel beautiful, how I'd always say they go, especially if you have multiple writers. So there are customization tools, and we try pretty hard so that when you go to the Ringer, for example, you see their art and their icons and their banners, and Medium sort of is in the background. You probably know it because it's our font and there's a very clean, elegant look. But we don't want to be in your face about our own branding. One of the things we care about, and I'm getting into like brand partnerships, lunchroom talk, not my forte, is we don't want to build custom packages for individual people. So we're very careful about building something that makes sense for the entire ecosystem. But one of the things that we don't care about as much is having the Medium brand front and center, because people who are coming to the Ringer, we want them to come for the Ringer. So I think there are, depending on your needs, some technical hurdles. You know, I've heard people wanting a shopping cart directly on every single page, and we don't have every widget for that. But in terms of making it look and feel like your own site, you probably won't go to the Slack publication and think Medium first and Slack second.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth.